My name is Brian Crombie, and welcome tonight to another one of our series of programs on our upcoming Mississauga, Brampton, Oakville, Caledon, Western GTA Summit that we're going to be having here in Mississauga on May 21st at the Mississauga Convention Center. The theme of this summit is going to be, Are We in Economic Gridlock? And we're going to address that through three themes. The first is going to be, how are we going to live in the future? Second is, how are we going to move in the future? And the third is, how we are going to thrive in the future. And for those of you that were lucky enough to see our show last week, we addressed with a great panel the topic of how are we going to live in the future. And we talked about the increased density and increased population and increased employment lands that we're going to have in Mississauga. And we talked about the importance of that from a budgetary standpoint and from how we need that to accomplish the Places to Grow legislation that the province of Ontario has put in place. Tonight we're going to have the first of two shows that we're going to have on the how are we going to move in the future. And as undoubtedly you're aware, there's been a lot of conversation in the Ontario Toronto area over the course of the last year on transit, congestion, transportation. And today we're going to focus on Mississauga, because I think a lot of people have said, well, how does this big move that Metrolinx and the provincial government have been talking about impact me on where I live in Mississauga and Brampton and Oakville and Caledon? So we're going to focus in on that very local impact from a transit standpoint. Next week, we're going to have another show, and we're going to talk about it from a big move standpoint, a GTA-wide, and we're going to have a guest from Metrolinx. So we've got two great panelists with us today. The first is Martin Paul, and Martin is the Commissioner of Transportation and Works at the City of Mississauga. This man is a traffic expert, if you can believe that as an occupation. He has spent 23 years with the City of Mississauga, before that with Hamilton and Burlington, focused in on traffic and transportation. And beside him is Frank Giannoni. Frank Giannoni is the president of Fram Building Group. He's built, I think, one of the best developments in Mississauga down in Port Credit. He's been a developer and a resident here in Mississauga for, what, 25, 30 years now, and very involved in the Mississauga Summit, in the strategic planning process that the City of Mississauga ran. And so he really knows things that are going on in Mississauga from both a resident standpoint as well as a development standpoint. And so thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us tonight. A real pleasure to have you here. Martin, maybe I could start with you. You know, lots of people have been looking at these articles in the papers about the big move and the conversation about how we're going to pay for all the big move. And they've come to me and they've said, Brian, what's this all about? How is it actually going to impact us here in Mississauga? I wonder if you could you know, tell us a little bit about the transit developments that are taking place now and that are going to take place in the future in Mississauga and in Brampton.
Well, Brian, right now we're building our transitway along the 403 Eglinton corridor. In fact, phase one, which will run basically from our downtown area, this Square One area, through to Dixie Road, we hope to have open before the end of the year. And it is basically a roadway for buses, not unlike some people may be familiar with the Ottawa Transitway. Yep. And there will be stations along the Transitway, and it will ultimately run starting from Winston Churchill through all along the 403 corridor and connect all the way to Renforth, with connections to the 427 that bring you into the Bloor subway, that bring you into the airport, that bring you up into York region. So that transitway is what we're building right now.
So can I interrupt you on that? So when you get to Renforth,
yes,
will there be a terminal that you have to transfer to other buses to get to the airport or to the subway, or how's that going to happen?
Well, that's a good question, because the transitway, the one good thing about it is it's not fixed. In other words, what we're going to really use it for is a conduit for buses that they can move along quickly. Today we have an express network of buses, and they are concentrated on the 403 corridor, and they will move quicker. But a bus could start, for example, in Meadowvale, at the Meadowvale Transit Terminal, run down, connect along the transitway, and connect all the way down to the Bloor subway. It considerably saves in time. Okay. For example, when you're traveling when the full transitway is in place, when you're traveling from the downtown to the Bloor subway, you will save approximately 15 minutes in travel time on the bus.
Versus what would that average travel time be now?
I think it's probably in the order of about, it's somewhere around closer to 45 minutes.
So you're going to 45 going down to 30, say 15 minutes. That's a significant reduction
That's significant, and that's when people can really see a big advantage with, you know, moving to what we often refer to as higher order transit, right, or transit that's moving quicker than the cars.
Okay, so that's phase one. What's after the the 403 busway?
Well, from Mississauga's point of view, we're focusing right now on the Hurontario corridor. We're working with Brampton, and we're really planning for light rail along the Hurontario corridor from downtown Brampton all the way down to Port Credit.
I think if I could interrupt, if you could show that visual. There's a visual that we've got here that shows the increase in density and employment land. I guess that's at the top right there is the Hurontario Eglinton to Derry Road corridor in blue. Maybe you could walk us through where that the LRT is going to be built?
Well, if you look right in the center, the downtown, the purple area, which is where much intensification will occur within the city, that area will be served very well by the light rail on Hurontario. As I said, starting down in Port Credit and moving up and then looping through the downtown area and then going directly up to downtown Brampton, which also connects with three GO rail lines, which are really provide the light rail connectivity into the regional network.
Right.
So people that are moving into downtown Toronto would go down the light, would get on, say, for example, the Lakeshore GO line or the Milton GO line and transverse into downtown Toronto or connect with the rest of the GTA. So it really is a interregional facility that we were looking for along that corridor.
So number one is the 403 bus rapid transit. Number two is the Hurontario LRT. What's number three?
Number three is the Dundas corridor. Again, a corridor. Today it carries a lot of transit users, but in the longer term, it will redevelop also. And so we are looking at that corridor. It's in the big move. I think it would first be a bus-based solution, probably for the next 30 years. I think in the longer term, it might move to light rail too. And we're actually just on that this year to start to look at what it should evolve with. Should it be, what should phase one be, and ultimately what should it be on the corridor? So we will be looking not only at the transit, but the land use.
Right. Frank, what's through is the transit changes. You're a developer. You've been very involved in the whole strategic planning process. As you think about an LRT on Hurontario and a BRT or maybe an LRT on Dundas, what are developers like you going to do? How is our city going to change? And is it going to change for the positive or for the negative with those kinds of transit improvements?
Well, I've had some experience with that. I mean, you talked about what we've done in Port Credit, but we've also had experience in Toronto, that transit lines. We're doing one in Calgary on their rapid transit line. We're doing one in Dallas on their rapid transit line. There's significant changes that happen, always positive. People live a different lifestyle. They don't have to get into their GO train in my travels to downtown Toronto regularly. And I have to admit, I'm a recent user. I've been at my office for 10, 12 years, and maybe it's in the last 5 or 6 years I started using the train. And what the stress level in terms of the confidence level that you're going to get there on time, it makes a big difference. Be able to walk to the train, take the train downtown, get back. When you're going to get back, and it makes a big difference. And, the half hour will make a big difference when they turn that on.
Street is right now, 1 to 2 story, maybe at most 3 story buildings and strip malls most of the way. If there was a BRT or an LRT, do you think that will end up being more higher density development?
Well, it isn't a pedestrian environment at all. That's why you have all these massive parking lots. I look at Dundas as, from a city planning point of view, as a huge opportunity. Because of all those parking lots, there are opportunities to bring people into that bus line, to create smaller pockets of communities, complete communities, where you've got everything that you're going to want in a very, very tight area. And that happens if we commit ourselves early enough. People are already starting to submit development plans along the Dundas corridor, and they're not taking into account that there will be a transit in the future. I'm definitely a proponent that if we're going to commit ourselves to that, we've got to commit ourselves to how we're doing sooner than later, and take advantage of some of the increase in values that are going to happen along there, versus letting it happen hodgepodge and the gain then goes to the eventual users.
So last week, the Minister of Transportation GO train service on the Lakeshore line by going to every 30 minutes rather than every hour and off-peak time periods. How does that change Port Credit and Clarkson?
Well, I think, and Frank mentioned it, it's huge. I mean, when you start talking peak, that's a long time. Half hour is a big difference. I mean, it's almost like you don't have to worry too much about when the next train's coming. You've got a little bit to think about it, but you know, you can start to have more flexibility, particularly in the off hours. I mean, the peak hour, there's a lot of service on the GO corridors, but if you're there later at night, or if you're there in the middle of the day and you have to wait a whole hour to catch the next train, that's a long time. So half hour is great service on that corridor. So
that I guess they need electrification.
They need electrification for that.
Frank, Joe Berridge came to, Joe Berridge is head of urban strategies, and he's actually going to be one of our keynote speakers at the upcoming summit. You may have been there, I can't remember if you were. You were. And he said, you want the biggest game changer for Mississauga or Brampton that I can dream of? And this is a man that's done urban planning, I think, worldwide. He said it would be all day, 2 lanes. And he said that the reason why is that it's not just going to be economic development, but it's going to be residential development, and it's going to be social development. He said it'll create connectivity within Mississauga and Brampton and with Toronto.
I agree with it 100%, and I'll bring in something else that has to happen as well. But you know, for me to travel downtown is one thing. You know, I can plan. I look at my schedule. I know if I'm going to miss. As Martin had said, if it's every half hour or every 15 minutes, even better. You don't even have to worry about it. You finish your meeting, and you're on your way.
So one of the things that
we're encouraging people now when they're coming to meet us in Port Credit, and that's starting to happen. But again, you got to pay attention to when you start the meeting, because you can't start at the hour. You have to start a little bit after the hour, and you have to pay attention to when you finish that meeting.
So one of the things that we want to do at the Mississauga, how can transit impact you in your daily life? So if you're at all interested in this topic, go to mississaugaSummit.ca, and there's a registration where you can sign up to get our newsletters, and then you'll get on Twitter, and we'll sign you up, or Mississauga Summit on Facebook. So get involved and come back after the commercial break, and we'll have more of this conversation. Thanks so much. Of the Mississauga, Brampton, Oakville, and Caledon Western GTA Summit that we're going to be having on May 21st. And we encourage you all to go to mississaugaSummit.ca or Miss Summit. We're going to have 4 mayors, the mayors of each one of those cities and towns, be our honorary chairs. We're going to have a couple of other mayors in attendance, the Minister of Transportation and the critic from the transit and transportation and improving our cities can have on Mississauga, Brampton, Oakville, and Caledon in the future. And the reason why we're having this Western GTA Summit is because we've been frustrated. It's all of the attention on what Torontonians want, and while that is a voice that needs to be heard in the GTA, we want a voice in the 905. We want to get together on May 21st, and we want to discuss some of these changes that are going to be happening in the Greater Toronto Area and how they actually impact us. And we want to talk about what in the City of Toronto and the people at Metrolinx hear what we want to have. So if you're all interested in how are we going to live in the future, how are we going to move in the future, and how are we going to thrive in the future, Frank Giannoni from the Fram Building Group and Martin Powell, the Commissioner of Transportation and Works from the City of Mississauga. And we've been talking about connectivity from Toronto to Mississauga and Brampton is important, but you also think the connectivity between those lines is critical. Expand on that if you could.
Well, what we need to do is we need to bridge those spokes. We need to be able to get people that, you know, come in on the Cooksville line. How do they get from there to Matheson? How do they get from there to Eglinton? So that's the challenge, and that's what the Ontario LRT will do. That's what in the future, and then getting on the subway doesn't spook anybody.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have that ability to do that, and we're a big city. You know, we're the sixth biggest city in Canada.
And it's equal to 1.5 million people. We would be the third largest city in Canada. So, you know, the people represented at this upcoming Western GTA Summit are highways that connect us. What are we thinking in that regard?
Well, I mean, we have a very good road network. We're going to get congestion whether we grow or not, because everybody around us is growing. The Oakvilles, the Bramptons, et cetera, are all growing, congested. We're also thinking of things like, how can we squeeze all the capacity
out of the existing roads?
And so we're looking. So this will help squeeze additional capacity out of the road network that we have. So we are thinking of things like service those that big industrial area west of the airport. But looking at this whole complete street, we want to make sure that cycling is you know, they might cycle for part of their trip, then they might use something like light rail, and then they may be able to get off. So we're thinking about
LRT in the middle and bike lanes, or what are you thinking about?
Well, you know, we do have some restrictions on the bike path, so we're going to try to get some form.
Street in downtown Montreal, they've got a separated bike lane with a curb between.
Now we're just in the early stages, so we're doing the concepts. I mean, we're really looking at lanes. Montreal's done a lot of work on trying to promote cycling, as has allowing people to connect to other forms of transit, like using our buses and putting bikes on it. And I know when we first...
A poll they did 2 weeks ago that said that 72% more for that. How do we bridge that?
And upgrades that we have to do. It's not necessarily good. So we've got to raise that money, such as is got to be a big part in this or that. But you know,
people know very well the value of housing.
Developers to pay for that.
That it was going to start just increase. It pays.
LA County.